Hello everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and today I've got one of those jobs to do that we don't always want to get to do, but we sometimes have to, and that is I've got some curtains to take up. Now I've already done this one. This is one of those ring top curtains. I've already done this one, and I took off about this much here. That's what's come off the bottom, and now I've got its other pair to do. And so just in case you've got a job to do like this, then I know that some people have found my videos to be very useful on those other things other than making the dolls and other than doing the dressmaking. So I just thought I'd bring you along with me, and then if ever you've got this to do, then you would also have an idea of where to start, which is one good thing, and also what kind of result that you can expect to get, and just some tips and tricks along the way, which hopefully will guarantee that success for you that everybody wants with all of their projects. So on this Sunday afternoon, let's get to taking some curtains up. Okay, so first things first, whenever we're working with curtains, we need to have somewhere where we can spread them out long enough to be able to work with them. And obviously that's going to depend on the drop that you're working with for your curtains. If it's a shorter curtain, you might find a dining room table will work really, really well. The other place to think about is on a floor as well, if you can clear enough space in order to give yourself some space to be able to work with. You don't need particularly wide, but you do need long, because you can always fold the curtain over itself on the width, but you do need the length when you're working with curtains. The other thing that I use is I actually use my hob. We've got an induction hob, so I'm able to, it's quite flat. So I've got this plastic roll here, which is like table protector. So it's got a felty side one side, and then it's got this hard plastic side the other. And that's what I use, and I just spread that over my work surface like this. And it makes a great cutting mat. I think you can get this kind of stuff on eBay or on Amazon, something like that, or just, you know, it's just a felt back table protector, but it works really well just to cover it and give me a good working space. The other place you can think about using is a bed. Perhaps your bed might be long enough as well to use. Just be aware though that you need to keep the fabric as flat as possible. I'm not saying it's perfect, but sometimes we don't have these choices, do we? So we have to just use what we can. Or if there's a local fabric shop sometimes, or a library, you might be able to use that space just to be able to, if you ask them first and see whether they've got an area that you'd be able to use that's long enough, they may allow you just to use that space. And it's purely just for the marking out. Once we've got the marking out done, then we'll be fine to use that. We'll be fine. We don't need the length quite as much, but we do just need somewhere where we can lay that out. Okay, that's the first bit. Okay, so the next bit is that if you're wanting to do a full length curtain and you're wanting to take that up, the best thing you can do is hang the curtain and then let the fabric just drop for a day or two. The looser the weave, the more the fabric might drop, because there's some give in the fabric over the length. And this is sometimes why we have problems when we're trying to determine the final length of a curtain when it's flat on a work surface, because as soon as you pick it up and then hang it up, the weight of all that fabric can then pull the loose weave of the fabric down, so that it then causes a problem when you're trying to hem it. So the solution to that, if you're doing a full length curtain, is to hang the curtain in place first, as I did with these fours. I can't turn the camera around just at the moment because in fact, actually in my bedroom, and the light's coming through that way. But if you hang the curtain full length in your room and just let it just drop, just let it settle for a couple of days and just get used to where it's going to be. Because then what you can do is you can then just smooth the fabric down, and I'll show you on this one that I've got here, is just to where there's the right angle between the wall or the window and then the floor. At that point there, you're going to put a row of pins. So as long as you want it to be, you're going to put a row of pins along that length. So the curtain will be smoothed down against the floor and it'll hit the floor level. This is particularly useful if perhaps your rail isn't perfectly straight, or if your floor isn't perfectly straight, because sometimes there can be variations, especially over a longer length. And this is how I found that you get the best results really for a full length curtain. So I'll just show you on here, and then I'll hopefully it'll make sense. Okay, so here's some floor length curtains, and if I was taking these up, excuse me bending down, but what I would do is I'd have all the excess fabric laying against the floor this way and have the drape of the fabric there. So just keep adjusting it over a couple of days. And then wherever your fabric is about to hit the floor, I would then put a row of pins along there just to make sure that you've got that kind of marked. And then you can then thread trace a little line across with a stitch if you want to, because you've got your finished length then once they're in place. The other thing to make sure is that you mark your left and your right curtain, so that you just put a little pin and a little piece of paper on and just say left and right as you're looking at them, so that when you come to relay those curtains, you know which side is which, because that's really important. So again, just try to smooth those fabric down. Any excess will be pooling here, and then you can then just smooth that fabric down, and then where it touches the floor, put a little row of pins, and that will then tell you the finished length on those. Okay, let me just go to some hanging ones. On to the next room. So I haven't got anywhere where I've got a higher curtain, all of mine are floor length. But what I just wanted to say was, if you've got a curtain, so we've got a windowsill here, look, where we could be taking curtains to if we wanted to. Still hang your curtains up onto the finished rail at the finished height, so make sure you've got that all done first. But then what I would do is then have a look and see what length you want your curtain to be, whether it's just below wherever your window frame is. And wherever it is, where those two curtains meet, put a little thread tack on your curtain, one on the left and one on the right. Still label them up left and right, so that when you put them up onto your window, you're able to know which is which. But you want that point at which these two curtains, the finished length, is going to be. And you want that marking because with fabric, because it just ducked down a bit, and I'm sorry about the light, but when you're wanting those curtains to meet, the most important point is where those two closed curtains meet. You don't want one slightly lower or slightly higher than the other, you want them to meet. So by having the curtains up in place already, I know it's a faff to take them up and down, but this is what we need to do to get the right result. Then once you get to that point, work out where you want that point of those hems to meet, and then you're going to put your little tack, and I'll show you one on the curtains that I've done. But I just want to show you on these in situ, because then it just helps you understand. Because in this case, all of this would be waste felt fabric curtain, and then at the end we want those two ends there to meet perfectly on the side just there. So that's what I do. Put them up in place. Find out where you want them to be, and then at the point where those curtains meet on each side, you're going to put a little tack. Okay, let's go on to our cutting table. Okay, so we're back against the cutting table now, and if I show you this one that I've already done, there's my little tack, look, which I have had to cut through just so that the hem laid properly, but it's just a little bit like a tailor's tack. I just left the threads in there, but that's the point at which those curtains are going to meet. And you can see I've done just a little bit beyond that, because that was a nice round measurement for me at 58 drop. But if I show you this curtain here, found my little mark. There's my little mark, look, on that one, look. So there is where I put my pin and then I put my mark. And when these are all hung up together, take these ones off the clippy hanger. Then I want those two marks to be exactly across from each other, and that will tell me that I've got my curtains level on my finished result. So that's what I'm doing with those. So whilst they're in place, just put your mark, and then we'll come back. You can come back here, and then we'll carry on from here. It doesn't matter whether it's the full length ones or a much shorter length curtain. You're still going to follow the same process from here. And these curtains are actually lined as well. So if you're working with a lined curtain, that will help you. Oops, just trying to hang those up. That will also help you. And if you're an unlined curtain, then it's just much easier because you've only got one layer to work with. But with a lined curtain, you have two layers. Yeah, okay. So then once we've worked out how long we want them to be at the final stage, the next thing that I need to have a look at is see how these are actually constructed. There's a little tag just there holding this pleated side across, just so to give it a nice mitered corner on this is the inside hem. The lining is loose, so we're going to keep the lining loose on our finished curtains as well. And we pay attention to how deep the existing hem is on both the lining and on the main curtain, because again that'll give us a clue. And what I try to do is not reinvent the wheel. Somebody else, the manufacturer of these curtains, has already decided how these hems should be finished, and to the best of my ability I'll just mirror that. Saves the thinking time, saves trying to work it all out. So I wouldn't now go on this curtain to a small 1/2 inch hem, when this one's probably got 2 inches on the hem. And likewise on the lining, I again wouldn't make a very small hem on that when this one's probably got 1.5 inches to 2 inches on there as well. So where possible, mirror the existing hem that you're undoing or taking off, because it just makes it so much easier and takes the guesswork out of it. Okay, for the next stage you're going to need your tape measure. Now I picked up this one. This is a 120 inch or 300 centimetre tape measure, which is great for when you're doing curtains. Pick that up from the show, and that was £2 from the quilt shop at one of the shows. So not a lot of money, but really useful. I also have a chalk pencil that I'll use that for marking my linings. I've then got my pin cushion with my pins in and my scissors. And we're going to be using all of those now to get this curtain sorted. So the first thing I'm going to do is, working with the length, is just open it out so that it's single layer on the work surface. And I'm going to work with I'll work with the striped side up, because we can follow the stripes to make sure that our fabric is straight. So you've just got a nice clear space to work with, because one of the first things we're going to do, or what need a quick unpick as well, is we're going to undo the side of these linings all the way up to our mark. So you know we've got our mark here, which we'd got where the 2 curtains joined, and we're going to take that up all the way, and probably about 3 or 4 inches past that, just to give us some room to work with. So let's get my quick unpick. I've just got my quick unpick, and this is one of those things that you use, and it's got that little pointy bit on the end there, as you can see. And the blade for the quick unpick is in the little V just in there between the dot and the point. So there's no blade along this part of the point just here, and the only blade is in that centre bit there. But you've got to be really careful, because the point will go through your fabric really easily, and the blade will happily cut anything that gets in its way. So being very careful, we're first going to undo the little tacking stitch which is holding these corners in place. And don't forget, your curtains might be constructed differently to mine, but we're just looking at what we can do to undo these just to get them going. So that's opened up that corner there, as we can see. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to start and undo some of the stitching. So this has got what's called an overlocked edge, where the fabric's been neatened along that edge just there, look. And then it's got a row of stitching as well. So what I found is that if we start off with the first row of stitching, get that loosened off, then if we're careful, we can put the little point, the little dot, that goes in underneath your stitches that you're wanting to cut, and then you can push up on it and it'll cut through the stitches. You can use the point, just be careful not to get any other stitches other than the thread that you're wanting to cut. But with this one, it's called a seam ripper for a reason. If you put the little dot in underneath your fabric, underneath the stitches you're wanting to take out, then if you're careful, you can run that along your seam. If you're a beginner, you're better off just doing the stitches one by one, and it will undo those seam stitches really easily. Just be careful. As soon as you hit any resistance, just pull back straight away. Those stitches should just come apart really easily for you, and just come apart like that. And then we're going to just take this up. So let's have a look and see where our mark is. It's up there, all the way up there. And we're just going to run this seam ripper carefully, and hold on to your edges on the behind where you've already undone your stitches, and you should just then be able to just go through. Just do a little bit at a time, and just keep your eye on things. You don't want to be ripping through any fabric at all, because that's going to take some width off your fabric, and you might not want that. Just nice and gently. And then once you've done that all the way up, I'll finish that in a second, come back and where your overlocking stitches are, get yourself started again, and then put your seam ripper in again and do the same thing with those stitches, and you should hopefully be able to get through those as well. Again, you can sit and undo these while you're just watching TV sometime. It doesn't take too long, but it's best to undo the stitches if you can do, so that it gives you room to work. So what we're doing with this is we're separating the lining from the main fabric, and as I say, we're going to go just a couple of inches, 3 or 4 inches probably, past where our mark is, our finished line is that we want to work to. Okay, and you're going to do that on both sides of your curtains. So you've got on each curtain, because there's a pair of curtains, you've got a left and a right seam edge where this lining is attached, and you're going to do that on both sides. Okay, I'll come back to you in a few minutes. Okay, so I've separated out the lining from the main curtain now, up to to a few inches past the point. You'll get a lot of stitches that are just sort of just like hanging on in there like this. There'll be a lot of thread around, but you just have to just work with that as best as you can and take off the longer bits that you've got like this, and just put those to one side, but the smaller bits you'll have to just hoover up later. It's unfortunately using a seam ripper, whilst it's quick on the unpicking, it does actually mean then that you've got a little bit more to work with in terms of tidying up. Okay, next thing then is we are going to smooth our curtain out with our print side up so that we can see where we're working to with the pattern, and we're going to smooth that down on our work surface as much as possible. You want as much as you can supported by the work surface you're working on, because you don't want your curtain to go off at an angle when you're actually working with it. The lining needs to, at this moment in time, because we're not cutting, the lining can just be sitting down underneath smoothly. Move some things out the way. So let's just get this hanging off the edge of the table, and that will give us something to work with. So you're looking for your curtain to be completely straight all the way down and not to have any gathers in it. You're just trying to take all of that weight as far down as you can do. And you're trying to make sure that the top is nice and straight, and that all the way down to where the mark is, and for me it's here, is nice and straight too. Let me just see if I can get some more lights on. Hold on 1 second. So just to say, this section here is just if you are cutting, taking a curtain shorter and you've and it's not to the floor. If you're to the floor, you'll already have your line across marked and you're going to jump ahead. But this is if you're doing one that's slightly shorter and you can't use the floor as your reference point, then this is how we are marking the length, the finish length first, in order that we can take it off. So let's get our pins as well, and we've got our tape measure, and we're going to measure from the top of the and make sure your tape measure stays right at the very, very top of that band, and then I'm going to use the stripe here and put some weight on it as you move it. You don't want your tape measure to move as you're going down, and that's why you need your curtain to be absolutely flat. And we're taking this one to 58 inches, which is just past the mark that we made, and then I'm going to put a pin in. And this, what we're marking now, is our finished length, okay? That's the point at which we want the curtains to meet at the end. This is not a cutting line, so just remember that. We're just marking the finished line to start off with. So let's move on to, in this case, I can move on to the next one. Just make sure that you're keeping your tape measure nice and flat. And if you've got any bumps, just make sure you're not sort of scooping over the top of those bumps. And then measure down again, and we want to get to that point there again, which is 58 for me. And if you've got a distance in between, you can always put a little pin in between as well. So you want them to be quite close together, because we're going to use these as a reference point as we go forward. So now let's move on to the next one. Again, just smoothing the tape measure down as we go. And the people who do curtains professionally might be cringing at this, but this is my way that I've done it at home, and this has worked very well for me in the past. Again, just join up that gap, so we're getting a nice line across here, and by going back up to the top all the time. Now you might be looking at me saying, why aren't you just measuring up from the bottom? And that's because in my experience, especially shop bought curtains aren't always level at the bottom. Sometimes they have variations in their measurements, and they aren't always straight. So this way, by measuring from the very top where we want to actually keep our fabric to, has been for me the best way of making sure that we get the correct length. So that's why I'm working this way down. So let's just take this down a bit more, make sure everything's all nice and smooth. Keep smoothing everything out and everything down. You don't want any creases or anything in these curtains, because that will affect the length. And then we're going to move across again, and we're going to keep marking our curtains down, making sure that tape measure isn't sliding underneath our hands as we're marking our next step. And then we'll just put a pin in again at that 58 point, just to mark that in place. Okay, so that's all doing quite nicely. So I'm going to carry on now and go all the way across the curtain, but I'll keep pulling it forward towards me as we work across the width. And this is where I say you can have it folded if you've not got quite as much room. And then that will then help you see whereabouts we need to go on for the next stage. So let me carry on with that. I'll come back to you. Okay, so I've got my row of pins now across marking. What I tend to do now is build in a couple of double checks. So on this one, we're just going to take a couple of random places and we're just going to redo that measurement and just make sure that our pins are in the same place. So that's smack on 58, happy with that. Let's do one just down here as well, just to make sure that that's all right and that we've not veered off at all. So that's to 58 as well, so I'm happy with that. The other thing that we can do is, because we've already altered one curtain, is we can lie that one matching up the circles on the top here. Less precise, but it just helps us make sure that we're where we want to be, and we can make sure and see that that one is going to finish right on the 58 as well. So we're happy that we've got that as accurate as we can be at this stage. And what we've got to remember now is that this is the first stage, so this is just a finished length line. This isn't a cutting line. So we're going to go back in now and we're going to have a look at our existing hem on our curtain. Take measure again. And this is where we're going to work through. So I can feel underneath where there's a turn under there. So there's a 1/2 inch turnover first and there's a 2-inch hem. So I know that under here, because you can just feel with your finger, or you can undo it a little bit and have a look on the actual hem itself, you can feel where the fabric is turned over. So I can tell that's 1/2 inch, and then the actual hem itself is 2 inches. So from this line here, I'm going to take my chalk pencil. Now I've got it lined in with pink at the moment, so that I can see on this white fabric, and I am going to measure down 2.5 inches, and then I'm going to put my mark. So I go to each of these pins in turn and just mark with this chalk pencil. So the tape measure is right on the edge of the pin, and I'll close in so I can show you, and then 2.5 inches. Let me just move the camera. So there we go, there's our next pin. Put the tape measure right on top of that pin, and then where the 2.5 is mark, I'm just doing one either side of that. And that's going to give us a nice line there for cutting. I don't mark with the pencil where my finish line is, because I don't want these marks here to stain the fabric and not come out with the chalk pencil, just in case. So it's just a little bit of a belt and braces situation. But now we're just going to go across all the way across this curtain, giving ourselves the marks to work to for our 2.5 all the way along there. If you've not got a chalk pencil, you could use an ordinary pencil, because this is going to be hidden underneath. Just make sure you're happy that you're marking in the right place, because obviously you don't want to then have to try and get pencil marks out, which would be difficult. Or you could also use another row of pins. You've just got to remember which row is the row that you're going to be cutting and which row is the row that stay in to tell you where the finished length is. Okay, let me carry on all the way along here, marking this, and then I'll come back to you. So now I've got my line of pink marks along here, which you perhaps won't be able to see, but I can see. Now I'm going to use my hand and just go underneath, and now I'm going to separate out the 2 layers proper. When I was putting the first row of pins through, I didn't really make any notice of the lining, because I didn't want it to get folded underneath and alter the length. But now I don't want that lining attached, so I'm just loosening back the pins until I can feel the fabric underneath has dropped for the lining, and then I'm just sliding those pins back into place. So I'm not even taking the pins out completely, and it's just where the fabric has got caught, and I can just release it a little bit all the way along. And this is so that we can fold the lining fabric back now, so that we can then only cut through the top half of the curtain, because we're going to work with these 2 layers separately, but I just didn't want them to get in the way while I was doing the other one. So as I say, it doesn't take long just to slide those pins back and just release the lining fabric from your top fabric on these curtains anyway. And your curtains might not be exactly the same as this in terms of construction, But the process is pretty much the same. You know, you're going to mark this top curtain first and alter that, and then we will then alter the lining curtain underneath to match it. And if you've got a completely separate lining, not attached to your curtains, you just do the same process with both curtains individually, and that would give you your 2 curtains. But generally you want your lining to be slightly shorter than your main fabric, but we'll deal with that in a second. So don't, well, not well, more than a second, but we'll do that later in the process. But just for now, just want to make sure that this lining is not going to get snipped when we cut our main fabric. Nearly there now. As you can see on most of these, I don't even have to take the pins out completely. We can just sort that through. So now I can fold back the lining out of the way. So I folded the lining back on itself up here, and that's just left me with this one single piece of fabric. And as you can see, there's the difference between where I unpicked it at the end. We've only just given ourselves a couple of inches to work with. I didn't take it all the way up completely. So now smoothing my fabric out again, I can see my pink line. So I'm now going to snip along this pink line to give us a cut edge now for our curtains. If you're in any doubt at all at this stage, go back and repeat the process and double check your measurements, because you don't want this to be wrong by this point. It's the old measure twice, cut once, isn't it, adage, and that definitely falls true with these because we don't want to be spoiling these. So let's just start and cut once we're ready, keeping our fabric nice and flat and cutting on our pink marks. If there's any variation, sort of smooth it out so that you've got it as neatly as you can do. There shouldn't be any variation, but sometimes there is a little bit in the weave. So as you can see, I'm spreading the fabric out either side here before I'm then cutting to make sure that I cut that straight. And this, don't throw this scrap fabric away. This could make cushions from the bed. It could make a bed runner for the end of the bed. It could be used for a project later in time. You can use it for toiling a garment. If you're doing a garment, you can dressmaking, then you can make a practice garment out of your offcuts. It's very valuable fabric, so just keep all of that together as neatly as possible through those marks and off the other end. Okay. So we have our fabric off at the moment, so that's good. So just fold that up and put that to one side for use for another project. Because the next thing we're going to do then is keep the lining out of the way. I'm not going to cut that until we've done the finished length of our main curtain. I do this in 2 sections. The next thing we're going to do is take our pins again, and we are now going to fold over 1/2 inch to give us our hem for our turn over of our curtains. So I'm going to measure over 1/2 inch and put a pin in. And you do want these to be precise now, because curtains are one of the things where they do fold back on each other, and when they're all pleated up together you want it to be as neat and as right as possible. So be precise on your measuring with this section. Plenty of pins all the way along, right into that corner. Open out any corners so you're working with the fabric flat. Because the next thing we're going to do after we've marked this is we're going to give this a little press with a press cloth, just to make sure that everything's in line with where it should be. And I've left my pins in, if you notice, for my finished length, because that's the reference point that we want all the time. It takes the guesswork out of whether we're right or not if we've got that in place. So again, I'm just turning up 1/2 inch here, and that will give us that 1/2 inch hem on the bottom there. Okay, so if you want to go ahead and do the rest all the way along your curtain with that 1/2 inch, and then we'll take it over to the ironing board and we'll get it pressed. Okay, so here we are at the ironing board, and what I would suggest you use is a press cloth. I've got the silk organza one here because I can see through it. But you can also use a tea towel or a pillowcase, or a fabric handkerchief are very good as well. You just need something light so that the heat will go through, because we want to press this seam now, this hem, just this halfway up, this 1/2 inch one, just so it holds it in place when we do the next stage. So I just lay my press cloth over. You make sure that you're on a low enough setting on your iron, and then just very gently just go over that edge. Now, if you've got glass head pins, then obviously you can iron over your pins, but I would suggest you try not to, because it does leave a little bit of an indentation in your fabric if you do. So if you're best just to try and stick to the edge of your fabric if you can. If pins come out, just remeasure that to make sure that it's the right width again. And again, just on that edge, just put a little bit of a heat. We don't want to melt anything, we don't want to shrink the curtains if in case they haven't been pre-washed. We just want to just put a little bit of memory into that hem so that we can work with it, and it'll hold it in place nicely for the next stage. If we try and skip this stage, what happens is the hem underneath will have the tendency to roll a little bit further than we want it to, and then that will distort your final hem. So that's why we are pressing this, just to make sure, and taking the time to do that, just to make sure that it's going to stay underneath for us and lay flat. So I'll just finish off pressing the rest of this hem, and then I'll meet you back at our table and we'll do the next stage. Okay, so we're back at our work surface now, having taken out our, pressed down our seam. Now we can take out those pins, and you can see how that seam is now staying in place for me without the pins in place. We've turned over 1/2 inch, and we know we left 2.5 inches because that was our existing hem. So now I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to measure it to the 2-inch mark. I don't measure it to my pins, I measure it to the 2-inch mark, because the pins are your double check. So just make sure that that's, and if we've got it right, then our pin marking our final edge, I'll show you just here, should be right on the fold of that fabric there, and this one is, look, so therefore we know that that pin's right. And it's just putting those double checks in. If we had taken all of those pins out, we wouldn't have that double check to work to, and I do like to have that. So I'm just putting my pins in into an angle so that I can take those out when I use the ironing board. The other thing is that with this striped fabric as well, I'm making sure that the stripes are directly on top of each other as well through the fabric, that they're not getting distorted like that, so that they're off. You're making sure they're sitting right on top of each other if that's the pattern. So again, on that stripe there, let's just measure that to make that absolutely right. And then if you want to, again, you can put a pin in between, but just make sure that your, as I say, your stripes are on top of each other. Just keep an eye on that, because it's another reference point for you. I'm still leaving those pins on that bottom because that is going to help us just keep everything in place. And that's how my pins are looking there, look, going sideways across, can you see? So that'll make it easier when we come to sew it. So yeah, so just going to carry on now all the way along here, taking the pins out that we've on the hem that we've pressed, but leaving the hems on our finished edge length so that we've got those to work with. And we're just going to go along and measure all of those in place. Okay, once we've done that, then we're going to just go to the, not going to go to the ironing board yet, we're going to go to our sewing machine and we're going to sew that seam down, but I'll talk to you about that when I get there. Okay, so welcome to my sewing room. I've got my machine set up. Now I've got a size 14 needle in there. I like to use a Schmetz Microtex needle, and that's what I've got in there at the moment. But obviously you can use an 80 as well, a 12 if you want to as well, that would be fine. The other thing that I've got on is my walking foot. I don't know if you can see that just here, look, this bulky thing here. And what that is, it's a special foot that's adapted onto my machine. This one for my Janome was £50, so it's a lot of money. But if you're working a lot with either slippery fabric, so satins and silks, if you're using stretchy fabrics, it's another great tool for that. And if you're using thick fabrics for like curtains or bag making or jackets, or denim, that kind of thing, then a walking foot is an absolute game changer in terms of what your machine can cope with and work with. If you've not got a walking foot and it's just a one-off project you're doing, then you should be able to use your ordinary presser foot that you use for ordinary sewing, and that should be fine. It's just because I've got it that I'm using mine. But what a walking foot does is it has, whereas you normally have feed dogs on your sewing plate under here, the spiky things, the sort of triangular things that sort of move underneath when you're making a stitch. On a walking foot, you also have those feed dogs on the top, so it feeds both layers of fabric evenly through your machine, so it gives you a bit more grip, a bit more stability. I've got polyester thread in, which is fine, and the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to increase my stitch length as well. So again, I'll look at the existing stitch length on the curtains and I'll try and match that. Between a 3.5, I think, is what I did on the other one, so that will 3.5 and or a 3 is what I'm going to do on the other one. You can see we've still got our lining just flapping around, but that's fine, we're not worried about that. But we're just going to find the end of our fabric where we are going to start at one end. And then get a pin cushion so we can stow our pins away. And then we're going to line up our presser foot so that the fabric is going to feed underneath. Now I'm going to move my needle across to the left hand side, so I've got a stitch that does that for me, but sometimes you can move the needle position either to the left or to the right, and that really does help you get a nice neat hem, because we can line up the presser foot to get maximum control all the way along this hem then, and that's what we want to do. So let me just move my stitch across, that's fine, and now I want to change it so that I increase my stitch length to 3.5, and that should work nicely. So let's hold on to the fabric so we don't move that. We've pinned it all very carefully, and I'm going to do a few stitches forward and a few stitches back. And then I'm going to put my needle into the work. Now I've got a button that does that for me, but you might need to use your hand crank that moves your machine, just so that when you stop, before you start to manoeuvre your fabric, everything is all lined up in place and on top of each other. Okay, so we're going to start stitching then, just nice and slowly. When we stop, that needle goes in the work. We can take out our next pin, and I don't sew over my pins if I can help it. Because I think it does mess up your machine, so just neaten that off. You've got your next pin and do your next area that you're working with. Keep all the bulk of your fabric over to your left, and then you're going to just neaten off so that you've got everything's all lovely and flat. You don't want your fabric pulled up like this while you're sewing. Make sure that everything that's sort of leading onto and towards you is all nice and flat and even, so that keeps it all nice for you. Again, we want a lovely result on these curtains. They're going to be up for a long time, so I'm just making sure that as I sew this, these stripes are on top of each other. And if you can see, I've still got my pins in, marking my final length at the moment. Just in case anything comes out of place, I've got a reference point. Every now and again, I'm just stopping, just making sure everything's all nice and neat. I'm taking my pin out. The other thing is, with a deep hem like this, a 2.5 inch one, if you find that there's something off with your curtains, you've got to unpick it, but you could unpick it and you've got plenty to be working with. If we'd only got that really small hem, then again, you wouldn't have so much sort of grace to work with, should you have made a mistake on the measuring, which sometimes can happen. I mean, it's not ideal, but it can happen. But you could reduce this down to a 1.5 inch hem if you needed to, and then you'd be able to work. You would try and make them both the same, because sometimes when the light shines through curtains, you can see the hem line, can't you? So you don't want that to show through, but it does give you that little bit of extra security. So I would always go for a longer hem than a shorter one, but you'd want to try and mirror what is on the existing hem if you can do. Once we've finished, we just take our threads off at the start and the stop, and there we can see our stitched hem just on there. And I've used the same coloured thread as they did on the original one, which is just this white, And again, if you can match the original thread as well and the stitch length, then that's all good and great. So there's our nice hem on the outside. So now what I'm going to do is take out these pins, because that's now a finished hem, and we're happy that we've got that all stitched to the end. And then I'm going to take this over and I'm going to just lightly press it. This isn't a time to steam the bejesus out of it. You want to just press this now just lightly, so that you've just got it just creates that nice kind of fold in the hem, but you don't want it to be so that it then either shrinks the fabric or causes it to distort at all with the steam because you never know if these curtains have been washed. The fabric is unlikely to have been pre-washed, and sometimes when you do wash curtains they can shrink. So again, we don't want to be using that hot steam on our lovely curtains and then distort the fabric at all. So just take it steady when you're doing, even though the fabric might look really robust, then just take it steady with your fabric. Just treat it with a bit of respect, and hopefully then you'll be fine while you're with your alteration. Okay, so next stage then is to go over to the ironing board and lightly press this. Okay, so we're back on our big cutting table again. This hem has been lightly pressed, as you can see. It's just got a nice little crease in it, but nothing too flat. And what I've done now is I've smoothed out the main curtain completely, and this is the lining now that has come underneath, that you can see underneath. So that's the extension of the lining where I've not cut it off, so you can see how much we've cut off. This is the finished edge of the curtain now, where it is looking all lovely and straight. And as I say, you just keep moving this fabric just straight down the length, just to make sure that that's really sitting nicely. You don't want any creases underneath that fabric at all. Everything needs to be just really nice and neat. So the first thing I'm going to do is have a quick look at our existing hem and see how long that is. And that's 1 3/4 inches with 1/2 inch there, 1/2 inch taken up. So I'm just going to round it up again, because we might as well. What did I do on my other one? Let's just have a quick look on the other one, see what I did on this one. I did 1 1/2 and 1/2. So 1 1/2 and 1/2 equals 2. So on this, that's what I'm going to do on this one. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the existing hem. We know we want it to finish 1 inch higher, because that's the measurement here, because we don't want the two hems to be exactly on. You want this staggered effect between your lining and your main fabric. So the difference I've got here is 1 inch. So we know we need 2 inches, 1 inch and 1/2, and then the 1/2 inch turnover, which would give us a 2 inch hem. So we need to allow 2 inches hem, but we want to be minus 1 inch here. So we only need to measure down 1 inch from the finished edge of our existing curtains, and then that will give us then the room then to turn up and for these two to match on the other side. So let's just go along all the way along here. I'm just smoothing down the curtain. Let me just move this one off the top here, because I don't need that one on the top here anymore. Just make sure that hasn't disturbed your fabric at all. And then we're just going to work along this, make sure your lining's all straight and that's all nice and straight too. And then we're just going to smooth down the hem that we've already got and mark our cutting line at 1 inch below. We're going to do that all the way along, and then once we've done that, we're going to take our scissors and then we're going to cut along this length here, along our line here. We know that it protrudes below the bottom of our curtain, and that's fine. And if you're not sure, just have a little test. So if that's going to be our hem there, turn it up then the 2 inches and see where it lands on the end, and you can measure the difference, and that will then tell you whether you've got your right length or not, just as a double check, because it's all about belt and braces, isn't it, to make sure everything's all straight. And I know this curtain doesn't look very straight on here, it's just the angle of the camera. It is actually straight in reality. Okay, so I'm just going to mark this 1 inch down below the finished length, and I'm going to cut off this lining, and then we're going to then start pressing our hem back up again as we were doing before. Just make sure that when you're cutting your fabric, can you see how this is pulling? That is going to distort your fabric. Always fold your fabric back here, so that when you've got your two cut edges together as much as possible, and so there's no distortion, no pulling of that fabric down for you, because otherwise that will alter the length, because those fibres will be pulled, and that will then give you a problem when you come to then hem this and put it back together again, because it won't be quite straight for you. So just make sure you've not got any drag on your fabric when you're cutting these lengths off, because you have got your lines to follow, but you just want to make sure that you're not pulling on that fabric. Okay, so once that fabric is off, we can now fold back the finished hem of the other curtain, of the main curtain, and now we're going to be working on our hem for our lining, making sure that we're pinning the raw side towards the inside because we want that all to be neatened off inside. We're going to find the end of our tape measure, and we're going to start now and do our 1/2 inch again on the bottom of this hem here. Making sure you can see, yep. So just pin that up 1/2 inch. We're then going to take this to the ironing board. We're going to press that memory into that crease like we did with the main curtain, and then we're then going to turn that up as well. I think it was 1.5 inches, wasn't it? On the other one, let's have a quick look. Yeah, and then I'm going to turn it over 1.5 inches and then press it again and put the pins in to hold it. And then we'll go back into the sewing machine, and then we're just going to run a row of stitches along that hem as well once we've done that. So first off, turn up your 1/2 inch, put your pins in to hold that in place and press, then bring it back to the board here, and I'll show you the next step then when we do that together. And now we can use those same pins to turn up, remove the ones that for where you're working on first for area, turn it up the 1.5 inches that we're working with on the second part of our hem. Start in the middle, perhaps be easier. Again, being as precise as we can be with that measurement. Once you get it started in the middle, it's easier then to follow it out to the edges. That's it. And again, you haven't got the stripes to follow this time, but just try and make sure that your hem is staying as neat and as right as possible. I'm just going to get that all ready now and prepped ready for sewing. So I'm just going to put that in place, and then we'll go to the sewing machine, and then we're using the same stitch length as well, the 3.5 stitch length, and we're going to just stitch that down and in place. And then just as a belt and braces, let's turn this over and just make sure, keep your fingers crossed, that when we fold this back down again, and we'll take our measurement, and that's all smoothed down, but we've got our inch at the bottom there, and we have. So, oh, you can't see. We've got our inch free at the bottom there, so we know we've done our calculations correctly before we actually stitch this down. So that's again, it's just that time just to double check that measurement to make sure everything is correct. But we've got our nice inch there already. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine. I'm just going to sew along this edge here. You'll notice that I've also got the manufacturer's label just here. I've kept that to one side. I tried to have that on the side that stays against the sort of the outside edge of the window, so it's not the closing edge, because you don't really want it to be in a conspicuous place. But I've just kept it pinned to one side at the moment because that's got the washing instructions on for the curtains, and what we want to do is we want to attach that back inside the curtain when we put this all back together again finally. We've got that so that we know how we're going to wash them if we need to in the future. Okay, so everything's the same on my machine, 3.5 stitch length, and I've got my walking foot on again. Let me just remove that first pin, make sure everything all stays nicely together and lined up. Hold on to ends, a few stitches forward, a few stitches back, and then when you stop, put your needle in your work, and then you can just readjust. And again, we're keeping the main part of the fabric out of the way, just exposing the next area of our lining that we want to be working on. Just smooth that down. Just take a few stitches forward. So it doesn't matter how many times we stop and start, there's no gold medal for going the whole length of the curtain without stopping. You're much better to take your stitching in smaller bite-sized distances, and also turn down the speed. If you've got a speed control on your machine, then you can turn down the speed if you want to. Just go at a speed you're comfortable with. You know, we do see pictures of people zooming all over the place, but you don't see the pictures of them then taking out their seam unripper to undo what they've done. So you're better off to take your time and to stitch slowly and carefully in order that you then don't have to unpick. That's my kind of thought process anyway. So we just do a little bit and then we adjust the next section. Get close to our pins, then we can take it out. This is all nice and flat to the bed. There's no puckers on here at all. You can't see it pulling or pulling that way. Everything's all lovely and lying nice and flat there, ready for me to sew it. I'm just guiding the fabric through with my hand, but there's no pressure on there. The actual foot itself is pulling the fabric through. And by putting the needle down into your fabric as you stop, you make sure you don't lose your place. Down to the next pin, which is always a good marker. So just reversed at the end. Let's take off our threads at the end and at the start, so we're neating all of that up. And then the next stage then is to take this and just lightly press that hem. Again, don't flatten it completely to within an inch of its life. Just give that a nice light press, and that will be sufficient just to hold that hem in place for you now. And then all we've got to do now is put the label in and just neaten up these sides and do the mitered corners. But I'll show you how to do all of that. Okay, so I'm just back from the ironing board and I've just slightly pressed our lining. Let me just get my orientation right again now. So we want to be working at the bottom down here. And I've got my piece of my label pinned onto the side that I want that to go in place, because the next thing that we're going to do now is work on the inside, so between the lining and the outer, because we know they're all nice. We've got to repair this bit here where we've undone that in order to sew it. So the first thing I'm going to do is sort of take that label off, and I know I'm going to work on it this side, so I'll put it to one side for now. And then let's just turn these two pieces of fabric round the other way. We can see we've got a loose thread here. We can just take off part of the overlocking that we've taken off. And what I want to do is just smooth those two lines of fabric down. So let's just tidy up where we've got any bits of thread that we don't need anymore. Smooth that down, and then we can put a pin at the bottom just to hold that into place. So that we've got that all nice. So you don't want it to be puckered up or to be pulling it, you just want it to be lying nice and flat. And what I'm going to do is just going to do a row of stitching just down here and through the lining to attach these two together, and then I'm going to go back again, and then I'm going to zigzag just the edge from the stop of the overlocking there, look, because that doesn't need doing again, that's already overlocked. But I'm just going to do one row of stitching to match the existing stitching, and then a zigzag stitch to overdo the overlocking. You can overlock them if you want, and I'm going to zigzag down all the way down to the hem on these as well. I won't stop at the lining, I'll go all the way down to the hem. I'm going to attach the label in a separate step, because I think trying to do too much at once can really make it confusing. So I'm going to take the stitch length back down to 2.2, because we're on to construction now, not top stitching as we were doing when we're doing the hems. And first thing, I'm going to put the fabric in so that I've lined up with the lining. Make sure everything's all nice and straight again. You want it all nice and straight. And I'm going so that I'm overlapping with the existing stitching about 1 centimetre, because that'll help anchor that down. A few stitches forward, a few stitches back, and then needle in the work as we always do. And then I can see the pinpricks in the lining, and I'm going to follow that down and then all the way down this stitch, all the way down the curtain. Stop to take my pin out. In fact, I'm going to stop at, no, I'll go all the way down. Right. And then just reverse at the end just to hold that in place. Needle out, let's take those threads off. It'll just give us a line to fold to. Take off our starting threads. And now I'm just going to go in and just zigzag over the edge of the, so I'll put it onto the zigzag, a nice wide one, that'll start it off. And then I'm just going to zigzag, and then just reverse at the edge. That will be fine. Let's take those threads off and take our starting threads off. So what we've done in doing that is we've been working on the inside of the curtain, so that now when we turn it round the other way, we've neatened all of this edge now, and that's all nice and neat. And what we want to do now is go back, and you see we've got a folded edge just to the side of this black line. That's the edge that was there before, and we'll mark the edge of the curtain. So we can just finger press that with the heat and weight of our fingers. And then what I'm going to do is where that point is just there, at the very bottom of the corner, I'm going to fold in the square edge here to make a right angle and fold that fabric back under. And I fold it under so that it makes it nice and neat on the edge just there, as you can see, hopefully. So that'll sit all nicely like that. And then we're going to put a couple of stitches through just to hold that in place, just to mirror what was there originally. So it was on a zigzag, but I'm going to take my stitch length actually down to as low as it'll go, this time at 0.2. Let me put a little pin in to hold that. I'm going to do it on the other side as well, so you can see in a minute. So now let's have a think. I want my stitches to go up and down, so they're going to go that way, aren't they? That's right. So once we've got it in place to hold this edge, we can then do a few stitches just where we are. That'll be enough just to hold that in place, so then I can snip off my threads. And this is just mirroring exactly the same. The other thing that you can do if you don't like that little tack-in stitch is you could hand stitch that down as well. So, oh, I didn't put my label in, did I? I forgot about that bit. So let me just open that up again. What we're going to do is just go over this again with the zigzag. Take the stitch length back up. It was on a 2.5, I think. And then we're just going to zigzag that in place again, just to hold it. It's just up from the hem. It'll just hold that in place so that the washing instructions are there, clearly visible. Just reverse it at the end and start. And that label's in there then for the curtain, so that I can know how they've got to be washed, and it's hidden just inside the lining. Look, you can just see the writing just under there. Okay, let's go to the other side and do the same again. So let's put it onto a straight stitch first, because that's the first thing that we want to do. So we're going on to the inside between the lining and the outer, and we're going to look at these two raw edges here, and we're going to lay one on top of the other. And I'll just put a pin in to show us where the end is, and just to hold that in place. And then we're going to just smooth all this out without losing the curtains off the table. And we're going to overlap those straight stitches again by about 1 centimetre. Reverse. Keep it nice and straight. We went all the way down to the bottom, if you remember. And just reverse. Take off our starting and our stopping thread. Just neaten anything up that needs neatening up. This fabric's got a real tendency to fray, which is why we are doing the zigzags. So there's our first pass of stitching down. Now we're going to go over about 1 centimetre again over top of the overlocking, and then we're going to zigzag down this side all the way down to the bottom. So let's put our stitch onto my number 8, which is my zigzag stitch. I'm going to reverse at the end. Oops, anybody else see me speeding up because we're getting towards the end? It's really hard sometimes, isn't it, to give ourselves a time just to slow down. And little whiskers like this after you've zigzagged, just cut those off because you don't want those there. Just neaten it all up. But that will just stop that edge from fraying any further. Okay, so let's go back onto the right side of the fabric and have a look where the actual fold is on these curtains. And now that black stripe is just to the inside on this one here. So let's just continue that down. And you can see the difference here on this stripe here to make sure that's all going to be naturally all the way down. And that's about right. So that then gives us this corner on the inside. And we don't want that corner there just leaning against the bottom there. So finger press that down just to hold that straight. Yes, we've got a little tack in there, but I'm going to leave that in until we're actually at the client put it back up again to make sure those are lined up. And then we're going to then fold that, so the edge that where it touches the hem, you're going to fold that triangle under. So it makes a point on the hem, and you fold it up until you've sort of tucked it under the edge of the lining so you can't see it, so it makes it nice and neat. See, that's where the fold is. So before it was like that, and here's our edge just there, and I fold that point under, so it tucks back up against this folded edge here, the edge of the fabric does, and that then gives that lovely, lovely mitered corner on the end there. Make sure it's all right and it's not poking out on the other side. Mine is tucking under just a smidge more, I think. And then once you're happy, I'm going to go through all of the layers, making that little mark. Oh no, nearly didn't turn my stitch length down. Just needs a few stitches just to hold it in place, and then take those threads off. I'll say that's almost invisible, look, just on there. Where is it? Just there, look. Okay, so there we go. We have now finished our curtains. All that needs now is let me just move these all out of the way. All that needs now is that I'm actually, with these being the ring top ones, I'm going to fold the rings on top of each other. So I'm just going to fold them into their pleats as they will hang once they are on the actual curtain. And then with the ring side at the bottom, I'm going to hang them by the hems with a clippy coat hanger. But I don't hang them by the ring end because that's the heavier end. We want to hang them by the other end so that the weight of the rings pulls them down, and that will then keep these pleats in place then for these type of curtains. If you've got a gathered curtain, don't worry. If it's not been gathered yet, then you can just leave it full length if you want to. But yeah, that's our curtains all done. All that needs to happen now is that we just need to take those to our curtain pole, and we need to put them back up again and then check our work. And as I say, we have got that built-in insurance on the edge there, which it would be annoying to have to undo it, but it's not the end of the world if we needed to in order to adjust the hem anymore. We've got that nice deep hem to be able to give us that insurance. Oh, I've got hair on my face. So that would be that. So let me just turn the camera around and I'll have a little chat with you. So I hope you've enjoyed sewing along with me today. Just to give you some kind of idea, these curtains are 1.5 meters in the length on the bottom hem. So the length, not this hem, but the one down on the bottom there, before when they're all flattened out, is about 1.5 meters in the width. So, and doing the first one, the reason why I'm telling you is because doing the first one, both the outside hem and the lining hem was 1 hour 45 minutes with all of that measuring and that cutting. So if that gives you some idea. Obviously when I'm recording, then it can take a little longer, or it seems like it's a lengthier process, but that's because I'm stopping and I'm explaining rather than just doing it. But I hope it really does give you the confidence to have a go at doing your own curtains. I think it really is a case on this type of project, measure twice, cut once, so that you can see how everything's measuring up. And remember to take those steps just to keep measuring back to your original pair or to your window, and just to make sure that they're where you want them to be. And that's the best way I can say of just making sure that you get them right the first time. And obviously we prefer to get it right first time if we can do. So yeah, I'm off to hang these curtains and we'll have a look and make sure that they're all straight and together. But as I say, I hope you've enjoyed sewing along with me. If you have enjoyed this video, then I'd love it if you give it a thumbs up, please, because that really does help my channel and push the videos out to other people. And also for other content like this, then I'd be happy if you fancied subscribing to my channel and then popping along. I think we're at nearly 2,500 subscribers now, so we're really starting to rank that up, and I'm so thrilled that 2,500 people find value in my content. So that's really rewarding for me as well, to be able to bring these videos for you, because they take quite a long time to record and edit and upload, as I'm sure you know from other people. But really happy to have you along with me for the journey. So have a great day everybody, happy stitching, and I'll speak to you all soon. Take care, bye.